Why smart people don't care about social life, not antisocial, just awake. Have you ever walked into a room full of people and felt completely out of place? Not because you were sad, not because you were shy, but because something inside you had quietly changed. The voices felt louder than usual, the conversations emptier. And though everyone was laughing, you couldn't help but ask yourself, what am I doing here? This isn't loneliness. It's the beginning of something rare. A subtle shift, a moment of awakening. Today we'll explore a truth that society avoids talking about: why solitude isn't a sign of weakness, but a path back to your truest self. Through the lens of Schopenhauer and psychological insight, we'll uncover what it really means to be alone, and finally, free. When you stand outside the crowd and realize you no longer belong, imagine stepping into a room full of people. The sound of chatter buzzes in the air. Laughter bursts like fireworks across the crowded space. Someone is sharing a funny story. Another group is engaged in an animated discussion about everyday things. Everyone seems to be in sync, moving to a familiar social rhythm. Everyone, except you. You stand at the edge of the room, not lonely, not sad. You simply no longer feel like you belong there. Your eyes don't seek connection, but a quiet place in your own mind. You're not avoiding anyone. Nor are you closed off, you're just observing, listening yet no longer drawn in. Something inside you has shifted. You no longer find joy in polite small talk, in forced smiles, or in fleeting conversations that vanish like smoke. You begin to sense that silence, at times, says more than 100 words. And you start to wonder, is it that you've changed? Or was the world around you never truly aligned with you to begin with? That moment, though brief, is the beginning of something quiet, the beginning of awareness, of transition, not because you're better or deeper, but simply because you've begun listening more to what's within. You no longer need to strive for approval, no longer feel the urge to force yourself to fit in. This isn't loneliness, it's the first step toward awakening, when you realize that standing outside the crowd isn't a sign of weakness but a calling, drawing you back to your truest self. When apathy isn't coldness, but awakening, there are moments when you enter a conversation and realize your mind is no longer present. Others are still speaking, still sharing, still expecting polite responses, but you feel no urge to engage. Your silence isn't arrogance, nor is it indifference. It's a simple truth. You're no longer moved by things that no longer matter to you. People often confuse apathy with insensitivity, but silence is not always a wall of coldness. Sometimes it is the outcome of inner purification. After you've endured enough superficial conversations, forced smiles, and feigned enthusiasm to avoid being left out there, comes a moment when you stop performing and you fall quiet. It is apathy born not from hurt, but from awareness. You are no longer easily swayed by praise or criticism. You no longer seek that feeling of belonging. And strangely, in that very moment, you begin to feel free. You stop reacting to everything, not because you've numbed your emotions, but because you've learned to be discerning with your energy. You no longer need people to understand you, to agree with you, or even to validate you, because you're starting to understand that true worth isn't found in other people's eyes, but in the peace you discover when you no longer betray yourself. This apathy may be difficult for others to grasp, but for you, it is the sign of a mind in recovery and a soul learning how to stand tall in a world that never stops screaming. Wisdom in solitude. When your inner world is too deep to be filled by others, people often assume that those who live alone for too long will become hollow, lonely, in need of being pulled out of their private worlds. But Schopenhauer saw the opposite. He believed that the more intelligent a person is, the less they need external interaction to feel alive, because inside them lies a vast universe no one has ever explored. The inner world of a wise person is unlike that of most others. It's not just a place where emotions pass. It's a birthplace of questions, of ideas, of thought streams that flow endlessly, while others seek crowds for stimulation or to escape emptiness. The wise return to solitude as a way of coming home. Solitude, to them, is not a sentence, it is a gift, for it is only in stillness that they can hear what the noisy world has drowned out. In solitude, they do not feel deprived. Instead, they feel richer than ever, free to be themselves, to shed the roles, to stop explaining, to no longer prove anything. That is why many intelligent people find shallow conversations draining and superficial relationships pointless, because they know nothing is more precious than a silent hour with oneself to read, to think, to write, to feel, and to touch a depth that no one else can reach. Solitude, when understood correctly, is not the absence of people. It is the inner fullness so complete that you no longer need anyone to fill a space inside you. You are whole. And that is the mark of a truly mature mind. Time to ask again, does happiness really come from socializing? From a young age, we are taught that sociability is a virtue, that the more friends you have, the more outgoing and socially active you are, the more successful and happy you'll be. Those who prefer solitude are often labeled as weird, distant, or even mentally unwell. But Schopenhauer posed a different, bolder, deeper question. Is socializing really the path to happiness, or merely a habit glorified by society? He believed that most people don't socialize out of true connection, but because we've been conditioned to think it's necessary, we cling to others to avoid the discomfort of our own inner void, but never stop to ask, do I truly find myself in these relationships? Only when we begin to look back do we realize how many conversations are just dull repetitions, how many relationships persist not out of resonance, but out of fear of being alone. We learn how to text at the right time, offer polite replies, show up just to be included, but how often do we truly feel understood? They all had something in common. None of them truly fit in, and yet each left a timeless legacy. This invites us to reconsider. Perhaps separation is not a limitation, but a condition for intellectual and creative brilliance. Schopenhauer believed solitude didn't weaken them. On the contrary, it was the only space where they could preserve their integrity. While the world demands conformity for acceptance, the deep soul must step outside the comfort zone to protect its essence. And that solitude, though often demanding, becomes the soil where intellect grows, where creativity remains pure, untouched by applause or doubt from the masses. Greatness doesn't always arise from crowds. Sometimes it is born in silent rooms, where someone confronts themselves, asks questions no one else dares to ask, and uncovers truths the world isn't yet ready to hear. And in that very separation, they write a chapter in humanity's story. It's not that they hate people. They just can't stand pretending. Many look at those who live in solitude and quickly conclude that they're misanthropic, withdrawn, or arrogant. But the truth is far more subtle and profound. The intelligent and introspective don't hate people. They don't despise society. They just can't endure insincere interaction. They grow weary of small talk, meant only to fill the void, of gatherings where everyone laughs but no one really listens, of relationships that exist out of obligation rather than empathy. Worst of all is the pressure to be pleasant in others' eyes, even if it means going against their own feelings. This exhaustion doesn't stem from their inability to connect. It comes from no longer wanting to connect in a false way. They are tired of acting in a play with a tired script. How have you been? It's been a while. Busy lately. Questions that expect no genuine answers. Those with depth don't need many words. They need presence. They need sincerity. A look without judgment. A connection without pretension. And because such things are rare in this world, they choose solitude not because they don't need anyone, but because they haven't found anyone worthy of entering their true inner world. That distance, when seen through judgmental eyes, may look cold, but through the lens of empathy, it is a form of self-protection, so they don't lose themselves in a society full of performances and starved of truth. But something strange happens when you spend enough time with yourself. You realize that solitude isn't nearly as frightening as you thought. On the contrary, it begins to open up an unfamiliar space where you no longer have to play a role, no longer need to please anyone, and no longer feel the urge to explain who you are. In that moment, silence stops feeling empty. It becomes freedom. Schopenhauer called this the state of someone intelligent enough to feel whole on their own. They don't view the presence of others as a requirement for completeness. They don't need external validation to feel valuable in solitude. They begin to touch their deepest self. When you no longer fear being alone, You start to hear the voice that used to be drowned out by the noise of society. You begin to realize how much of your life you chased illusions just to feel accepted. And the moment you stop doing that, you begin to feel free, not from the world, but from the fear within yourself. Being alone is no longer a void to fill, but fertile ground where you begin to replant your truest self. Society teaches you to fear solitude, but it's where healing begins from childhood. We are taught by society that we must have lots of friends, be outgoing, and socialize in order to be liked. Quiet children are seen as having a problem. Adults who don't network are viewed with suspicion. We grow up carrying the belief that being alone is somehow wrong, shameful, or even a sign of failure. But this very belief causes many people to live in hollow relationships, endure meaningless conversations, and fear stillness as if it were an enemy. We run from solitude, not realizing that it's actually the doorway back to ourselves. Schopenhauer saw this clearly. He believed that silence isn't a misfortune, but a necessary condition for humans to truly hear themselves. In solitude, you're no longer driven by others' expectations. You begin to face your true emotions, your unanswered questions, and the wounds that were never healed. Only when no one else is there to distract you do you begin to truly touch your inner world. And sometimes, that's where healing begins, a quiet but profound journey, where you stop being a social construct and start becoming yourself whole and free. Communication or performance. When society turns you into a false version of yourself. In many of our daily conversations, people are not really seeking truth. They're seeking comfort. We learn to say just enough, to present ourselves just right, to maintain a likable image that fits our surroundings. Gradually, we become a version of ourselves that is no longer real, just to be accepted. Schopenhauer observed that most social interactions are ritualistic. They're governed by habit, by expectations, and by the fear of exclusion. People engage in conversations not to truly understand one another, but to uphold roles, preserve social standing, and reassure themselves that they're still part of the group. For the intelligent, this quickly becomes exhausting. They're sensitive to pretense, to empty compliments, to conversations that lack substance. They see behind smiles a sense of guardedness, behind words a need for control, and behind politeness a fear of rejection. That's why they often choose silence, not because they have nothing to say, but because they no longer wish to say things that aren't real. They no longer want to perform in a play that everyone's tired of, but no one dares to stop. And in that silence, they rediscover something society has made easy to forget. Authenticity, even if lonely, is worth living for. Not everyone deserves the energy you give. We grow up with the notion that we should be kind to everyone, that kindness is the gold standard of social interaction. But Schopenhauer posed a deeper question. Is giving always the right thing to do? Does everyone truly deserve your time, your attention, your sincere emotional investment? The intelligent often recognize something most overlook. Emotional energy is a limited resource. Listening to someone, caring about them, being open and honest, that's not trivial. It's an investment. And not every relationship deserves that investment. The more self-aware a person becomes, the more selective they get. They no longer feel the need to show up everywhere, respond to every invitation, or maintain relationships just for politeness' sake. Not because they're cold, but because they understand that if they keep giving energy to things that offer no real connection, they'll eventually lose themselves. Genuine affection should not be wasted. A meaningful conversation, a relationship that nourishes the soul, those are rare. And to protect that, the intelligent are willing to be silent, willing to walk away, not because they resent others, but because they've learned that not everyone is worthy of entering their inner world. And that quietly is an act of self-love, one of profound courage. Schopenhauer warned that great intellect without compassion turns people inward, cold, dismissive, and even contemptuous of those who differ from them. But that is not true wisdom. It is the shadow of the ego dressed up in reason. The truly intelligent person is one who sees society's limitations, but does not become bitterly isolated. They understand that everyone is struggling with their own limitations, and that pretense is not always deceit. It can be a survival mechanism for souls still wounded. That's why awakening must be paired with compassion. Don't let your clarity make you cold. Don't let your insight rob you of empathy. When you can see the world for what it is, yet still keep a soft heart. That's the sign of a truly mature soul. And in a world full of conflict, that is the rarest kind of strength. The relationship you once trusted may have been circumstantial all along. Have you ever looked back on a relationship that once felt close, even eternal, only to realize it quietly faded away, as if it never existed? No big conflict, no dramatic goodbye, just no longer needing each other. Schopenhauer explained this with a truth few dare to face. Most relationships aren't built on deep resonance or soulful understanding, but on circumstance, being in the same class, working the same job, sharing a life stage. And when that circumstance ends, the connection fades, then disappears, often without a word. The intelligent often see this sooner than others. They stop naively believing that all relationships are meant to be lasting or profound. They understand that some people are only meant to walk with us for part of the journey, and that doesn't make them bad, nor does it make the memories meaningless. That awareness allows them to let go with grace. No blame, no resentment, no clinging to what no longer belongs. And when you understand that many connections are simply reflections of shared circumstances, you begin to treasure more deeply those relationships born of choice, not chance. That's when you begin to build a spiritual life that is intentional, grounded, and truly deep. Intelligence doesn't like noise because it needs space to bloom. Some minds need silence the way a garden needs morning sunlight to grow. The deeper a person thinks, the more sensitive they are to noise, not just sounds, but the noise of information, meaningless chatter, external expectations, and relationships that require them to strain themselves. Schopenhauer believed that intelligence cannot flourish amid chaos. When you are constantly forced to react, engage, and perform, there is no space left for contemplation, for connecting with the true depth within yourself. Every profound idea needs emptiness to take shape, and genuine creativity only emerges when the mind is undistracted. That's why intelligent people tend to avoid noisy environments. They stay away from crowded gatherings and purposeless conversations, not because they judge others, but because they understand this. Mental energy is precious, and it must be protected. When you begin to choose quiet over chaos, you are not retreating, you are creating space for your inner self to breathe. And in that space, you begin to hear what truly matters, what you are thinking, what you are feeling, and how you truly want to live. That is where intelligence begins to bloom, not loudly, but deeply and sustainably. They're not running from society, they're just walking a different path from the outside. Those who live in solitude are often misunderstood as running away from people, from responsibility, from the friction of daily life. But Schopenhauer saw them differently, not as those who gave up, but as those who chose a path that most people lack the courage to take. They are not fleeing society, they simply no longer let it dictate their direction. They do not reject people, but they no longer trade their inner truth for the comfort of belonging. While most seek validation from external approval, they retreat inward to ask, "Who am I without the roles I have played?" This is not an easy journey. Going against the current often means being seen as strange, distant, or even unstable. But the truly awakened are no longer concerned with labels, because they know their path does not need to be loud to be meaningful. It just needs to be true to themselves. And it's when they dare to turn off course, to step out of the mold, that they find true freedom, the freedom to live by their own rhythm, not conditioned, not controlled by expectations or the gaze of others. It's a path few take, but it leads straight back to the authentic self. You don't need to be liked. You only need to be free in today's world. Being liked has become a measure of worth. From social media to real life, we are swept up in the pressure to impress, to maintain an image, to be likable in the eyes of the many. But Schopenhauer offered a sharper, simpler truth. Being liked is not the goal of the awakened, it is being free. Intelligent people don't chase universal approval. They understand that truth isn't always pleasant, that being true to yourself sometimes means disappointing others, that you cannot both be authentic and please everyone. Inner freedom begins when you stop needing to be understood, stop trying to explain, and accept that some people will never truly see who you are, and that doesn't make you any less valuable. It simply reminds you worth doesn't come from recognition. It comes from the courage to live according to your nature, even when that nature is quiet, different, or hard to define. The truly strong are those who dare to be disliked so long as they remain loyal to themselves, because at some point you must choose pleasing others or protecting your freedom, and the awakened will always choose freedom, not as an act of rebellion, but as a quiet affirmation: I am enough as I am, without needing to be defined or approved by anyone. Don't chase relationships. Come home to yourself when people feel lost. Their first instinct is often to look for someone to confide in, to be near, to remind them they're still connected to the world. But Schopenhauer offered a sobering insight. That very need to seek others constantly is what pulls us further away from ourselves. The truth is, the more we chase relationships to fill a void, the more we fall into unhealthy connections. Relationships born out of fear of loneliness, rather than genuine resonance, only leave us more exhausted. We hope others will understand us, but we've never really understood ourselves. The intelligent often realize this early. Instead of blaming others for not listening, they begin listening to themselves first. They don't place the burden of healing on others' shoulders. They sit with themselves in stillness and begin unraveling the knots in their own hearts. Because they understand no one can give you a sense of wholeness if you haven't found it within. No one can heal you if you haven't faced your own wounds. And so they stop chasing. They turn inward, not to escape the world, but to rebuild their foundation in that place. There is no dependency, no fear of abandonment, only a human being learning to be with themselves in peace and in fullness. Inner awakening, when solitude becomes the greatest healer in the end. What the truly intelligent seek is not separation, but truth, not isolation, but awakening. And they come to see not everyone is meant to walk the path with you, because there are some roads whose depth can only be reached by walking alone. Solitude, once a source of fear, becomes a quiet companion. It is no longer a void to be filled, but the space where healing begins. There, you start to realize you don't need to be fully understood or constantly validated. You just need to learn how to accept yourself, both your strength and your fragility. Schopenhauer didn't urge us to abandon society, but he invited us to see it clearly, so we might choose to live more consciously. When you stop searching for meaning in others' eyes, you begin to find it within. When you dare to face the silence, you begin to hear your truest voice. That is the moment of awakening, when you no longer run from loneliness, but use it as a mirror. Each day is no longer a race for validation, but a return to self. And from that place, you not only heal your old wounds, but discover a purpose deeper than any relationship can offer: to be yourself in stillness and in absolute freedom. Not everyone will walk this path, but if you are, keep going. The journey inward is quiet. There are no standing ovations, no cheering crowds, and often no one who truly understands what you're going through. But if you find yourself drifting away from shallow conversations, no longer seeking approval, choosing stillness over noise, then maybe you're already walking a path few dare to take. Not because you're wrong, but because you're awakening. And awakening always begins with loneliness. That is the price you pay to reclaim your truth, your freedom, and your wholeness that was once lost in this world. You don't need to rush. You don't need to explain. You don't need anyone's validation. You just need to be honest with yourself, one step at a time. Because true maturity doesn't come from being seen by others. It comes from the ability to stay with yourself, even when no one else does. And if you find yourself walking alone, remember, you are not lost. You're simply ahead of your time.